Of all the great female players to come out of Georgia, there can only be one called the greatest. Her maiden name was Wendy White. A Westminster School grad, Wendy White at one point was the world's top amateur player while at Rollins College in Florida. She reached the college singles final as a freshman and won it as a sophomore, playing an all-court game. She was clearly something special.
She was one of those players that once she could picture something, she could do it. She could channel it and do it. And so she could stay on the baseline, but she preferred to go in, but not all the time. I think that was one of the beauties of her game, is that she could do both. She could stay on the baseline or she could go in. Not particularly serve and volley, but to chip and come in.
She had a great court sense, a great competitive spirit.
From college, it was on to the pros, where unlike today, there was little money and notoriety on the women's tour.
Wendy was one of the early pioneers in the women's tour that Billie Jean kind of got off the ground, and I think Wendy did a lot to make that tour successful.
But for Wendy White, that was okay. There was just something about being on the court that made the grind worth it.
Wendy had a joy that just lit up her face when she was on the court and off the court. And she used to do this thing when her face would light up. Her feet would just tap just a little bit. And I always thought that was the root of her lithe movement and her quickness on the court. I think that joy was the root of that movement, and that ability to do what she did on the court, and that ability to be resilient.
She was just a great example with her sportsmanship on the court. She loved people. Around the world, I watched her, at the big tournaments, and she interacted with the officials and the people, and even the general public, just in a real gracious way. I mean, I think people really loved her.
White was on tour for a decade plus and racked up singles titles and was a multi-round winner at Wimbledon, the US Open, and the French. She had wins over many of the great names of the 1980s, just as her early coaches predicted.
We were all of the mindset that these girls that we were bringing through our programs, various programs, would be in that forefront. And I think she picked up on that. And I think she was very much ready for it.
White married husband Scott and left the tour in the early 90s as Wendy White-Prausa. She teaches juniors today and is the same gracious woman who wowed everyone with her game and her sportsmanship all those years ago.
She and Laura Garner were playing in the finals, and it was a tough match, and they were friends as well as competitors. And at the end of that match, which determined a lot for both those girls, those young girls, Wendy was, as always, just as gracious as she could be, and took joy in the win, but not necessarily joy in beating her friend. And I think that's always been something that I saw in her, and that it's a form of gratitude almost, to be so happy to win, but to be so gracious as not to wish to beat your friends.
Wendy White-Prausa, a member of the Georgia Tennis Hall of Fame.